Thank you so much for being here today. It's a pleasure to have you all join us. My name is MLA George.
And my name is Steven Zhang.
Now, today we have an exciting line of panelists and a diverse audience to talk about innovative green technologies, climate change, and how to shift into a green economy while analyzing the impacts of climate change and the impact of human activities on the ecosystem. Our special guest speaker today, Daryl Oster, is the CEO of ET3 Global Alliance, a consortium dedicated to the implementation of evacuated tube transport technologies. Stephen will tell us in a second a bit more about Daryl. But the reason that Mr. Oster is able to join us here today is also because, thanks to the Liu Institute International Relations Community Fund. Now, this is an award given to international relations students such as myself to organize an event here at the Liu Institute and invite a special guest speaker to talk on issues related to global affairs and sustainability. We'd like to take this opportunity to also thank the university and the Liu Institute for Global Affairs and the UBC International Relations Program for their support in today's event. We're also delighted to be joined by MLA George Heyman. He representing the riding of Vancouver Fairview, and Professor Aitken from, sorry if I mispronounce your name, from the UBC Faculty of Forestry. We'll also shortly formally introduce all of our panelists likewise. So thank you all for joining us here today, the three of you, and for taking the time to speak with us. Now, the challenges of our times are unprecedented. The rhetoric around climate change has oftentimes been incomplete. Global warming is definitely part of the problem we're facing today. But the impacts of human activities have gone far beyond that, affecting the ecological balance of the ecosystem and causing other negative externalities such as the acidification of the oceans, soil erosion, deforestation, and the rapid extinction of species, just to name a few. The solutions, however, are there today. Innovative technologies that mobilize people and goods at speeds exceeding 6,000 kilometers an hour are just one example. Leading the way to shift policy into a green economy is another. And acknowledging the impacts of climate change while seeking the means to remediate the impacts of human activities on the ecosystem are also a crucial part of the puzzle. But before we introduce our panelists and guest speaker, we'd like to tell you a bit about our project, Values in Perspective. Now, Values in Perspective is an initiative aimed at fostering constructive dialogue between different sectors of society to address complex socioeconomic issues. And our focus is students and members of the community to achieve sustainable models of development through workshops that we've had in the past. And our approach is to encourage knowledge sharing and professional development by promoting a global mindset to local issues. Now, we believe that sustainability will only be achieved with an interdisciplinary mindset and willingness to bring in different perspectives to tackle the unprecedented challenges of our time. So these are just some of the workshops that we've had over the past few weeks, and I see some familiar faces for those of you that came to the other workshops. At the very end of today, we'll talk about how some of these themes are all interconnected, because we believe that everyone has different insights and different perspectives that they can bring into the table if we are to address climate change and achieve sustainability with conviction and leadership. And our project, now one final thing about our project is it's taking part in partnership with the Rotary Club of Vancouver and has been awarded the UBC Connected Community Grant, and as I just mentioned, the Liu Institute International Relations Award for its commitment to community, sustainability, and global affairs. Now, we'd like to start off by introducing our great line of speakers and panel members. Stephen?
All right, so today we're incredibly lucky to have Daryl Oster speaking for us. Coming from his home in Colorado, Daryl is the CEO of Evacuated Tube Transport Technologies, or ET3. He is a champion for this form of sustainable transportation. Daryl is incredibly knowledgeable in the field of green technology, having spent many years in the field. He graduated from Walla Walla University in Washington, where he studied mechanical engineering. Before establishing ET3 Global Alliance and becoming CEO, Daryl has had all sorts of positions in consulting for engineering firms. He has continued to play a big role in developing this technology and pushing a shift for ET3. Daryl may just change our world profoundly, but this will still be done step by step with the help of all of you in the audience. The floor is yours, Daryl.
So please. All right, Daryl, so we'd like to welcome you, and if you could come up and give a presentation. Thank you.
How many people arrived here today by public transportation? The highest percentage I have ever seen in a presentation. Some of the things that we are dealing with are age-old problems that were first observed and written, maybe not first observed, but written down in the year 1513 by Machiavelli when he wrote The Prince, that there's nothing harder to achieve than a new order of things, because you only get lukewarm reception from those that would benefit, but the ones that are threatened attack the innovator. So it's really hard to get started with a new paradigm shift. But there have been several paradigm shifts in transportation. Transportation is the master key to survival on Earth. If we can't get to food and water, or if food and water can't be brought to us, that's the key to survival. We can't survive without transportation. If we double the speed of transportation, how much more opportunity do we have on a daily basis? Does it double or does it go up even more? The area of a circle is proportional to the radius squared. So if we double the speed of transportation, we have 4 times as much opportunity to survive on a daily basis. So every transportation advance transfers directly into standard of living and ability to survive. Trains, but a lot of this depends on energy too. And fortunately, this chart here illustrates the immense amount of solar energy potential that exists. This right here is pretty hard to read, but this little small dot over here is how much energy we use on an annual basis. And this is tidal energy, this is geothermal energy, hydropower, which Canada has a very high percentage of highly sustainable energy at very low cost. It's probably the best and the most efficient and the easiest to access. Biomass, wind power up there in the green at the top. Now these are all the non-sustainable energies. This is the total amount of coal energy that exists. This is the total amount of uranium, the total amount of petroleum and natural gas that exist on the planet. So once these are gone, they're gone. But the renewable sources is what we can really focus on in the future for transportation. Just like cars and airplanes replaced steam power 120 years ago, 150 years ago, we can look forward to replacing fossil fuel powered transportation with electric transportation. Another thing that we can look back on is the lessons learned with trains in the United States and Canada. Originally, 120, 150 years ago, they built the trains to different standards, different width tracks. And some of those limitations of tracks are still closely tied to trains. You notice here a switch mechanism. Those tracks actually have to bend to switch the train from one track to another. That limitation is still common with trains. All trains, even Maglev trains, have that limitation, where it limits the frequency of vehicles that can use that right-of-way. And one of the reasons that cars displace trains is they do not have that limitation. They can go anywhere in the network of roads, the networks of freeways, without relying on somebody at that track to throw the switch or automation to take place. Another thing that we don't stop to think of is that more ton kilometers of cargo move through tubes in the ground than move by roads. It's really incredible to think of. We don't stop to see it very often because it's hardly ever visible. But in the United States has 3.2 million kilometers of paved roads and 3.7 million kilometers of pipelines. Pipelines are much more efficient than moving things by road from an energy perspective and also from an environmental perspective. Much less opportunity to spill into the environment than going by train or truck. Another aspect that we are faced with transportation that we have already conquered with telecommunications is the issue of manual control. 100 years ago, these telephone operators, it might have taken a whole building full of telephone operators for a city the size of Vancouver to be able to switch all of the telephone conversations. Now, this little router sitting on the same 100-year-old operator stool can switch more packets of information than a whole building full of switchboard operators, and much more reliably and much faster and much cheaper. And we have rooms full and buildings full of these high-speed routers. If we were to rely on manual control to switch all of our internet and cell phone conversations, there wouldn't be enough people in the world to do it. And if there were, could you imagine the drop calls and the misrouted communications? Transportation is on the verge of being automated. And companies like Google have, with their political clout, have been successful in making it legal in 4 states to operate automated vehicles without a driver, driverless cars. Another issue with transportation is comfort. Wouldn't it be nice if we could, instead of getting stuck in the middle chair in an airplane with 2 people that might not have showered recently on either side, wouldn't it be great if we had our own private vehicle with a like a lazy boy type of sitting environment where you kick back like you do in front of your TV, and you know, you can fall asleep there and spend hours in that very comfortable position. Before I get into this new form of transportation that can displace past modes, we need to stop and think that just like the Wright brothers could look up and see birds flying and realize that there are scientific principles that make that possible, we can realize that the moon has been orbiting the Earth for millennia, and the Earth has been orbiting the sun at 67,000 miles an hour, 100,000 kilometers per hour. And all of us on spaceship Earth are traveling in orbit. And then the sun is orbiting the Milky Way at over 300,000 kilometers per hour. So right now, we're traveling somewhere in between 200,000 kilometers per hour and 500,000 kilometers per hour in orbit around the Milky Way. The average human travels 500 billion kilometers per lifetime without even realizing it. We can bring those conditions down to earth. And I'm going to be making some forward-looking statements here that are not proven in reality yet, but we believe, and I think you might believe too, that this is very achievable and can be achieved in much, much quicker periods of time than our last paradigm shifts in transportation. Our vision is a network of tubes. ET3 stands for Evacuated Tube Transport Technology, is the 3 T's. If everything's built to the same standard in every country, eventually it can be networked together in this global system across the Bering Strait between Alaska and Siberia to connect almost the entire world's population. What ET3 is it is learning the lessons that have been taught by cars replacing trains. People prefer to travel in car-sized vehicles. Cars have won the global transportation market all over the world. If you don't have to pay the driver, if we're talking about automated vehicles, the labor advantages of large vehicles mostly go away, and there's tremendous advantages to making small vehicles that can be routed directly where they need to go instead of an average of where a few hundred people want to go or a bus full of people want to go. And there's a lot of advantages, as we'll see, of making those small car-sized vehicles that have already won the marketplace. I'm going to start a little bit of a video here. It will explain things a lot quicker than what I can.
We invite public debate about halting further investments in expensive.
Okay, this right here that we're looking at is a new form of magnetic levitation called high temperature superconductor Maglev. That is a piece of yttrium barium copper oxide. When it's placed in a magnetic field, it levitates with almost no resistance, and it's totally stable without any electricity or electronics. That's the first generation prototype in China. That vehicle's hovering about 15 centimeters above the track, and $3.50 worth of liquid nitrogen will levitate that car-sized vehicle for 7 hours. 50 cents an hour levitation cost.
Luckily looks very different than today. Implementation of new technologies no longer require the fast burning of fossil fuel to get you to your desired destinations. With future transport, you can get there a lot faster and cheaper. Imagine a world without pollution and noise from traffic. This world is brought to you by the fifth mode of transport called Evacuated Tube Travel Technology, or ET3 in short. ET3 is poised to reach speeds of, yes, 6,500 kilometers per hour.
What you see is ET3 operates like a car on a freeway. The capsule in green is coming into an access portal after exiting the system, like a car going off an off-ramp on a freeway. It comes into the airlock, and people can get in and get out and get back in. And then after people get in, it accelerates up to speed, just like a car merging onto a freeway. Once it gets up to speed, it merges into the flow of traffic, and it can be routed anywhere in the network, like packets of information are routed through the internet.
We invite public debate about halting further investments in expensive rail, asphalt, and even overhead lines to establish how ET3 can transport cargo, passengers, and utilities much more effectively.
Many nations are nowadays investing in wind energy. We calculated that if ET3 system will replace existing modes of transport, it will save 3 to 5 times more CO2 emissions as compared to wind parks that will be built for the same money. ET3 has much better granularity. It means that in the future you can place ET3 stations, or ET3 access portals as they call, much closer to where you live.
In the coming decades, an access portal will be built near to you and connect you with shopping malls, supermarkets, towns, beaches, and tourist destinations all over the planet in one go. No more transfers. On the left, you see the tubes with uninterrupted traffic flowing at the design speed continuously and without fossil fuel. This is the ET3 frictionless limousine that floats on magnetic levitation. Magnetic levitation, or Maglev in short, truly is the technology of the future and has already been used for decades effectively and safe. Entering the evacuated tube system that allows for frictionless travel happens through an airlock.
I'm expert in these basic fields to evacuated tube transport technology for already 40 years. It is feasible technology. It is possible to do. The only thing that is required is that some decision makers will say, yes, we believe in this technology, let's do it. Let's dare, let's take a chance, and let's do it. Future of the transport is with ET3. If you want to participate in ET3, you can buy a license, it's available on our website, and then you're a member of a team.
Oh, started over. Back in Henry Ford's day, he had to aggregate what would now amount to tens of billions of dollars to build a whole series of factories to mass produce automobiles. It's amazing that it ever took place. He had to build a factory to process ore into iron. He had to build another factory to process iron into steel. He had to build a factory to make engines. He had to make a factory to make transmissions, a factory to make gears, bearings. Everything had to be vertically integrated. There was only a few things that were mass produced. Firestone had started to mass produce tires. That's one thing that Ford did not have to build a factory to do because it already existed. Right now, all the capacity already exists to build ET3 using existing capacity. So ET3, the company, is an open consortium model that allows companies that have already made investments in the production capacities necessary to build ET3 to do so with parallel processes instead of the serial processes that we had to go through 100 years ago. So we can achieve this paradigm in transportation much, much quicker than past paradigm shifts in transportation. The magnetic levitation technology is supplied by many different companies. There are many different companies all over the world that make helical pier foundations that can be screwed into the ground in 15 minutes per span instead of the several weeks of work per span to put in the massive foundations to support high-speed rail infrastructure. The open consortium model also leverages expertise. This is Frank Davidson. Does anybody know the name? It's actually his wife, Iseline, that had the crazy idea when they almost died crossing the English Channel. Their ship was sinking as it was coming into port after the war. And she said, Frank, your father is the famous engineer that built the 5-meter diameter tunnel to carry water from the Catskill Mountains to New York City. Why don't you have him build a tunnel that we can ride in a train under the English Channel? It took him 35 years to bring that about. And Frank told me, he said, Daryl, he said, the biggest problem was not the technology, as difficult as it was to make that tunnel. 90% of the problem was political barriers that are put up. It's really hard to get through. That first quote of Machiavelli rings true today, just like it did 500 years ago. So diplomacy is really the biggest thing that's necessary. But we have attracted a team from all over the world. This is Dr. Kamata in Japan, a famous physicist that held the world record for concentrating a permanent magnetic field. This is Professor Wong and his wife, the inventors of high-temperature superconductor Maglev in China, where we lived for 5 months getting them started with ET3 and transferring their magnetic levitation technology and combining it with our technology. It's been verified in many universities and schools. Colorado School of Mines we've worked with for 3 years, and a couple dozen student teams of 4 to 6 people per team have verified a lot of the work that we have done. ET3 is now an open consortium. There are now 375 licensees in 24 nations that are dedicated to bring this to reality. But what's going to be the cost of doing that? And that's where it gets really, really exciting, is because if we compare ET3 with high-speed rail, for instance, that's being talked about all over the world, what we find is that if we levitate a car-sized vehicle, that vehicle only weighs 550 kilograms fully loaded with people. About 360 kilograms of people is the same amount that fits in a typical car, or a load of 360 to 400 kilograms of cargo. So the total vehicle weight is just a little over ½ a ton. If we have 2 vehicles passing on a 25-meter span that's shown here, that is the maximum weight that span will ever see, is just a little over a ton of live load. If we compare that to high-speed rail locomotives that weigh 100 tons each, 2 of those passing on a bridge span is 200 tons to hold up. That's why that 2-meter section of the high-speed rail infrastructure weighs 35 tons of concrete and steel, where the same 2 meters of ET3 is only 1 ton of material. So it's going to take a 35th of the concrete and steel to build ET3. And that's one of the big reasons that we can make ET3 so much lower cost. Also, there's automated production capacity that exists all over the world for making pipelines in mass production. The capacity already exists. We can use these capacities in parallel instead of wasting all of the effort making a giant leap backwards to 110-year-old technology or 150-year-old technology. Why don't we surge forward with new technology? Elon Musk, perhaps you've heard of him with his Hyperloop. Anybody heard of Hyperloop? Hyperloop's made a big step in the right direction, and we really admire Elon Musk for having the courage to take a stand against the rail industry that is spending hundreds of millions of dollars all over the world to convince government officials to wine and dine them and take them on luxury vacations on high-speed rail systems in Europe and Japan, and focusing all that effort on having the politicians take taxpayer money to line the rail industry's pocket with. That's what's going on. That's why we're jumping backwards in technology instead of going ahead, is those political forces are really the most difficult to overcome. The Hyperloop is a big step in the right direction. He's talking about bus-sized vehicles instead of train-sized vehicles, which is a lot cheaper infrastructure, a lot lighter weight infrastructure, maybe a third the cost or half the cost of high-speed rail. But ET3 with car-sized vehicles, if we look at the cost, in green here we see the cost basis of those 2 tubes. If that were a cost basis of 100 units, the small version of Hyperloop, the bus-sized vehicles, would be 3 times the cost. And the larger Hyperloop version that you can drive the Tesla cars into would be 10 times the cost. Because the cost of those tubes varies with the diameter cubed. If you double the diameter, it's 8 times greater cost. Also, high-speed rail, if it's going through an underground tunnel, it displaces a lot of air. And if it's in a small tunnel, that air causes a pressure change and can damage people's ears when 2 trains pass in a tunnel at high speeds. So the tunnel has to be enormous. When ET3 needs to go underground, those 2 tubes could be put in a much smaller tunnel, only 4 meters in diameter, which is 1/18th of the amount of rock or dirt to remove for tunneling underground. So about 1/18th of the cost for underground infrastructure. ET3, since it's not limited, since we use a proven freeway philosophy and interchange philosophy like a car on a freeway, the infrastructure is not limited by that switch that limits the frequency of vehicles that can use that very expensive infrastructure. So while a train is limited to 1 train with 1,000 people or 2,000 people every 5 or 6 minutes at the most, a freeway can safely carry 1 vehicle every 2 seconds per lane. So if we have a 4-lane freeway, that's 1 vehicle per second in each direction. ET3 at a diameter of 1.5 meter tube can carry 10 vehicles per second because it's automated and not reliant on human control and the human reaction time. So 1 pair of 5-foot diameter tubes, 1.5 meter diameter tubes, each one of those tubes could carry as much as 40 lanes, and that's what we see across here is 40 lanes. So 20 lanes in each direction, 40 lanes total. What we see here is 20 lanes total. So imagine double that, the whole screen filled with freeway. That pair of 1.5 meter diameter tubes has that kind of capacity at a design speed of 550 kilometers per hour. If we double the design speed, we double the capacity. So at 6,500 kilometers per hour, the maximum speed of ET3, it will accommodate 120 vehicles per second, car-sized vehicles. So 10 times the capacity at 400 lanes of freeway traffic. That pair of tubes across the Bering Strait could carry every single pallet on every single container, on every single container ship traveling between China and the United States, and have 80% of the capacity available. That would only use 20% of the capacity to move everything that's currently moving through the oceans. It's been reported that one of the mega container ships pollutes as much as 50 million cars. Just a couple dozen of those container ships pollute more than the entire world fleet of vehicles, of cars. There are thousands of container ships. It's already proven that car-sized vehicles take almost everything home from Home Depot and Walmart in car-sized vehicles, so the same thing can happen with supplying those locations. Over 94% of cargo items will fit in a capsule that is only 1.3 meters in diameter and 4.95 meters long. A shipping container will accommodate 98% of cargo items. To build ET3 big enough like Hyperloop is proposing, to move shipping containers would increase the cost by a factor of 30, but it would only increase the utility for cargo purposes alone from 94% to 98%, only a 4% improvement in cargo utility. Is that wise use of resources? Yes or no? Other people think that we can have small roadable vehicles like this that might go 100 kilometers on only 1 liter of fuel, or the equivalent energy in electric capacity. If that had retractable wheels, it could drive right into an ET3 capsule, and you could get from here to Beijing, China in about an hour and a half and have your vehicle with you when you go there. And that would be at about a third of the cost of flying. If you didn't take your vehicle with you, if you traveled with a few other people in a car-sized vehicle, it would be about a tenth of the cost of flying. The first ET3 project is what we're looking for, where to build it. It's going to cost about $20 million to showcase all of the elements necessary to network ET3. It takes about a third of that 5-kilometer distance to get up to speed. The vehicle will coast for 1/3 of the distance, and it takes about a third of that distance to slow back down from 600 kilometers per hour, is what we're focused on doing. So we need 5 kilometers of straight right-of-way. It could be right beside an existing railroad track without disrupting the flow of traffic on the railroad. It could be right beside an existing freeway. It could be beside existing power lines. There's existing right-of-ways that can be leveraged for ET3. Billions, if not trillions of dollars have already been invested in ET3 by governments all over the world. All we need is a permission to use it for public purpose. If we have this built in a location by a major city that has a lot of traffic, like 3 lanes of freeway traffic in each direction, we can probably attract enough people to pay that $20 million cost just operating it as an amusement ride, and pay the government money for the use of that right-of-way to turn that right-of-way, instead of a cost center for government, to be a profit center for government. There's a lot of economic benefits and effects that will trickle down with ET3, just as have with the automation of telecommunications. How much does a typical cell phone cost? A couple $100? How much does a high-end cell phone cost? Does anybody have a cell phone that costs more than $1,000? Maybe $700 or $800, a few of us maybe. How about our cars? How much does a typical car cost? 20 grand? A high-end car like a Tesla, maybe $80,000 to $100,000? Or how about the Bugatti? That's over $1 million. What will be the effect on our economy when automation of transportation takes place? Building the whole world again in transportation. What's the economic activity all over the world that we generated by that? What we're looking at here is current market share for transportation modes. On the extreme left in red, this line right here is muscle power. The yellow is automobiles, and the green line is air travel. And in the bottom of the scale, the horizontal axis is distance of travel from 1/10 of a kilometer up to 1,000 kilometers at this end towards me. The vertical axis is market share, from 0% market to 100% market. Right now, we're seeing automation in transportation take place in the market gap between walking and driving, where it's too far to walk but not far enough to drive. That's where we see ski lifts. That's where we see moving walkways at airports, those types of elevators. That's where we're seeing automation in transportation take place now. We believe that the sweet spot for ET3 is that market gap that starts where there's resistance to travel at maybe about 200 kilometers up to about 1,000 kilometer distance. That's really the sweet spot for ET3, where it will encounter the minimum amount of resistance and benefit the greatest amount of people. So we could imagine a line between Vancouver and Seattle, for instance, connecting population. What's the population of the metro area here? Maybe 3 million people? Is that pretty close? And I think Seattle's maybe the greater metro area there might be 5 million people. So with only, about 250, 300 kilometer distance, we could connect a lot of commerce and a lot of people. And then it's likely to spread out into other areas where you could, get over to another really good route. It's much flatter ground also, and will be lower construction cost, is from Calgary up to Edmonton. Each city about 1 million population, and then continuing on up to Fort McMurray, maybe also ET3, believe it or not, can probably even support the oil industry, and a lot of those profits could go to making ET3 and giving the oil industry an opportunity to break into a new market and add more value to their resources. Instead of taking that oil and selling it, that's $50 a barrel now roughly, and refining it just a little bit and turning it into $100 a barrel motor fuels, why not sell less of it, but make it for plastics like the chairs that we're sitting on right now, that can last for many, many years and not be burnt up, but instead be recycled and repurposed and not put into the environment, and give the oil companies much more profitability by refining it to a greater degree, and maybe selling it for $500 a barrel instead of $50 a barrel. What's wrong with that? So instead of seeing the oil companies as a pariah, as an enemy, we can recognize that when we point our fingers to the oil companies, we have 3 fingers pointing back at us. It's really our problems, and it's the ability to survive so much easier that creates that market for those resources. And they can be used for other purposes. They don't have to be put into the environment and burnt. We can divorce it from fossil transportation, from fossil fuel production. Our vision is that if ET3 is built to the same standard, learning the lessons that we learned from rail 100 years ago, if everything's built to the same diameter tubes, the same standards in every country in the world for their own local use and local purposes, eventually it can be networked together with the global backbone in green that would connect the entire world, where the average person could travel from here to Beijing, China, for instance, in an hour and a half. Continuing on that global backbone, you'd arrive in Delhi in about another 45 minutes. Another 45 minutes beyond that, and you'd be in London or Paris, the long way around. And being it's a car-sized vehicle and a car philosophy that's already proven to be preferred all over the world, you are in control of where that vehicle stops, and you'll never be farther than 15 minutes from a access point where you can get out and stretch your legs, get a sandwich, use the washroom, whatever you need to do on your time, without interrupting the flow of vehicles using that infrastructure. What we're doing is we are bringing space travel conditions down to Earth
so that everybody can enjoy them on a daily basis instead of just a few lucky astronauts. And we need a lot of help. We're an open consortium. Anybody can get involved, leverage the skills that they have, the contacts that they have, the production capacities that they have to achieve a new paradigm shift in transportation for everybody's benefit. Thank you.
Well, that was quite something, wasn't it? I mean, I personally hadn't come across ET3. It was around when I was 16 through a documentary, and it was really inspiring, and I feel that Stephen also feels the same way. So it's, I know it's a lot to take in, but it definitely shows the potential that there is when we work together, when we bring the future to the present, exploring human potential for the betterment of society and for the collective well-being. So, Stephen, now we'll take just a quick, no more than a 5-minute break, and then we'll get back with our next speaker. And is there anything else you'd like to say to the audience? Maybe eat some food, you know, socialize, and
yeah, go for it.
Yeah, and yeah, then we'll reconvene in about 2 to 3 minutes. Thank you.
So next we're going to have George Heyman, the MLA for Vancouver Fairview. MLA Heyman is a member of the NDP and serves as the opposition spokesman for the green economy, technology, and TransLink. Previously, he's been executive director of Sierra Club BC, one of the province's oldest environmental advocacy organizations. And he served 3 terms as the president of the BC Government and Service Employees Union. George has also been a faculty member at SFU's Dialogue and Negotiation Program and has guest lectured in numerous universities. He's a strong proponent for bringing environmental responsibility to the legislature and advocates for a more sustainable, modern, and diverse economy. Needless to say, MLA Heyman is an expert at what he does and is absolutely invaluable at our panel today.
Thank you very much. And clearly, one of the things that my takeaway from Daryl's presentation is that simply aspiring to get from UBC to Langley in rush hour in an hour and a half pales with against the prospect of getting to Beijing in the same amount of time. But that's how technology changes the world. I've been giving a number of presentations. I wouldn't call myself an expert on technology, but what I do think I'm able to do is see what some of the possibilities are and in the world around us. And too often, and we certainly experience this in federal political discussions and provincial political discussions, we're often told on the one hand that we have to deal with the challenge of climate change, or the world and the habitability of it will change for us and all other species irrevocably, or that we have to choose between the environment and economic well-being and jobs. And the truth, I think, is that we don't have to make that choice, that the choice we can make encompasses a healthy economy and a livable future and a sound environment where we live in balance with the ecosystems that sustain us. One of the comments that stuck out for me at the beginning of Daryl's conversation was that all we really needed to advance with very significant transportation technology would be decision makers to simply say, we believe in this, let's do it. It puts me in mind of a cartoon that I didn't bring a slide deck with me, but it puts me in mind of a cartoon that I've used in some of my other presentations of a mother and a father seeing their young son off to university, and as they wave him off, they say, be afraid to try new things. I don't think that should be the motto with which we send anyone off to university or to the future generally. I think, in fact, if we are going to have a bright future, we need to embrace new things and not be afraid of them, at the same time as we ensure the well-being of people who, for whatever reason, are stuck in aspects of an economy that we're trying to transition away from as we build a new one. One of the things that the drop in oil prices, I think, has taught us, if we look at Alberta, if we look at other places in the world, is the value of a diversified economy. That if we put all of our economic eggs in one basket, particularly a resource basket, where we don't add value and where we don't understand the impacts of carbon pollution on the well-being of the economy and the places in which we live, we risk not only our health, but we risk our economic and societal health as well. I think there's a couple of different ways to look at the economy, and unfortunately the measures we use, whether it's gross domestic product or other measures of economic activity that are commonly used by politicians, measure what I would call a profits-intensive economy, without any respect whatsoever of what generates those profits, whether it's healthy economic activity or whether it's economic activity that's devoted to cleaning up mistakes that were made by other aspects of economic activity. A good example of that was Kinder Morgan saying that one of the advantages of their proposal would be that even if there was an oil spill, there'd be thousands of jobs cleaning it up. I don't think that's the kind of economy we want to build. I think we want to concentrate on a healthy economy that sustains us, that sustains the planet, and that employs people, or what I would call a jobs-intensive economy. So there's a couple of levers that governments and decision makers have in terms of helping to invigorate the economy in which we live. And we recently had a provincial budget, and as I looked at the budget, I saw what for me were a number of flaws. There's levers that governments use. They're generally, whether it's tax credits or other forms of economic incentives to create jobs and build the economy, and you can give tax credits or subsidies in a number of ways. And what I noticed in the budget that was brought down in February in British Columbia was that there was a total of $5 million of new money devoted to what I might call the green economy. $2 million of that was devoted to the film industry, and $3 million of that was an increase in the small business venture capital tax credit, which happens to support early stage venture capital investment, often used by the tech sector because there's a proliferation of startups and new companies there. By comparison, the subsidies that were given in the form of money devoted to maintaining and upgrading oil and gas roads in one part of British Columbia for an industry that's actually fairly stagnant right now may have some promise. We've been promised it has some promise, but we've yet to see it materialize, is $20 million a year. That to me is a gross disparity, and it's one that does nothing to transition us to a green economy, nothing to support technology, and nothing, frankly, to employ more people. The Auditor General in British Columbia has shown that in the last couple of years we've had over $1 billion of incentives to the gas industry, and a mere fraction of that to support technology, to support the tourism industry, to support film or anything else that could be termed a part of the green economy. If we look at the tech sector in British Columbia, we see that it's grown six-fold in the last 20 years. There's now over 84,000 people employed in a whole range of technology companies in British Columbia. That's more than the entire suite of resource industries, forestry, mining, and oil and gas put together. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't have resource industries. I would say we should use technology to find ways to add value to our resources in order to make non-renewable resources last longer, go farther, employ more people, and help support our communities in a better way. But when you look at those numbers, you have to ask, why is it that we don't spend more of public tax dollar resources supporting elements of the economy that actually employ more people, and not only employ more people, but employ them at wages that are 66% higher than the BC industrial average. The BC Technology Industry Association has pointed to a number of things about the tech industry in British Columbia. It gives the tech industry in BC an A. It recently did a report card based on a study by KPMG, gives the tech industry in BC an A compared to other industries operating in the province, but a C+ compared to the rest of Canada, particularly the provinces in Canada that have robust tech sectors. And the factors that lead to the lower grade are the lack of skilled talent, which relates directly to a shortage of particular skills that are needed in the tech sector, which goes to the capacity of our post-secondary education system, along with, I would say, exorbitant costs for young people who seek to go to university. In British Columbia, people graduate on average with over $30,000 in student debt, which leads to a high non-completion rate as many young people make hard choices about how much debt they're willing to take on in order to have the future they want, or whether they're going to take a break, go to work for a while, may never return, whatever. The other factor that the BCTIA points out, and I touched on this, is the lack of venture capital for early stage companies. And we see in other jurisdictions with the successful tech sector that there is greater investment of the private sector and government and venture capital. It's not up to government to provide all the money for investment, or even the majority of it, but what private sector investors generally look for, and Elon Musk is actually a good example of this. When Nevada was looking to revitalize its economy and build its tech sector, it decided it wanted to turn things around in 5 years and look at exactly what things it could do to attract people like Elon Musk. I say attract people like Elon Musk because that's exactly who they attracted, Elon Musk and Tesla. And within 5 years, they reached an agreement that sees much of Tesla's work being done in Nevada. So what the private sector looks for is whether government itself believes, whether policymakers themselves believe in the potential for a sector and in the entrepreneurs within their province or state or country. So the industry called on the provincial government and the federal government to provide venture capital seed money, which they estimated would be leveraged about 3 to 1 with private sector money. That's the kind of thing that would have resulted, according to the BC Technology Industry Association's own studies, in an increase in the percentage of GDP provided by the tech sector, which currently is sitting at about 8% of BC's GDP, doubling it to 16% in about 6 years. That's with the influx of new venture capital versus simply continuing on the trajectory that the sector is currently on, which is gradually going up, but not to its potential according to the studies that have been done. And the difference between the status quo and the new money is about 31,000 new jobs over 6 years. That's phenomenal. That's obviously good for British Columbians when you hearken back to my comment that the wages are high in the sector. It's tremendous potential for individuals working in the sector, for innovation, and for actually the return to government by taxes of people working at very high wages. So what does the tech sector do? It doesn't simply invent things that are nice. I mean, it does invent things that are nice and fun to play with, but it also invents the kinds of things and that Daryl was talking about, new modes of transportation, ways to apply technology to resource development to lower carbon emission or get more value from the use of fewer or lower amounts of non-renewable resources. Let me use forests as an example. Old growth forests are tremendous carbon sinks, have a huge role to play in controlling climate change. Agreements have been negotiated between environmental groups, First Nations, and logging companies to maintain 70% of existing old growth in the Great Bear Rainforest while extracting more value from what is logged so that everybody wins, including the climate, including the ecosystems that are affected, and including the province as a whole. Technology has a role to play in that. The clean tech sector devoted to energy generation, storage and transmission and transportation, clean water management. Technology plays a role in, in developing ways to do all of this. Pulse Energy here in BC is exporting energy management software, helping about 1 million United Kingdom companies reduce their carbon emissions. In the last 5 years, there's been a 37% increase in full-time Canadian jobs in the renewable energy industry. Yet here in BC, we have on the books a BC Innovative Clean Energy Fund that used to provide money to small companies seeking to develop new energy technologies. There's very little money left in that fund. There's no new money being put into it. And the tech sector and the ability of British Columbia companies to contribute to technologies that will fight climate change as well as employing British Columbians and helping the economy is simply somewhat stagnant right now. And I've had that raised with me directly by people working in the sector who say, we have an exportable technology, it's mature, we need a bit of help, and we don't understand why this fund is dormant. It's made a difference in the past, it can make a difference in the future. Last year, 37 new wind power projects came online in Canada, and according to the Global Wind Energy Outlook from the Wind Energy Council, wind power across the world could create 2 million new jobs by 2030. Even without subsidies that I talked about earlier to the oil and gas sector, and with falling oil prices, the cost of generating power from renewable energy sources has already reached parity and is falling below the cost of fossil fuel energy. So that begs the question, why in Canada are we focusing so much of our attention on gas fields and oil fields? Yes, we're going to be using fossil fuels for a while, and we will be extracting them, and we will, if we're smart, add value to them and do more processing in Canada, but we should be looking to where the future is. Just as hockey players are taught to look at where the puck will be, we should look to where the future will be, and we should start moving there. And we should start moving there before we're left behind. I'll simply wrap up by talking about some of the other opportunities that exist in the green economy in British Columbia. Studies show that the most cost-effective way of reducing climate change emissions is energy conservation, and building energy efficiency is the most cost-effective way to conserve energy. We should, in Canada and British Columbia, be supporting and investing massively in retrofits of commercial buildings, of public buildings, of private housing. There's ways we can do that without it costing the taxpayer money by setting up loan funds to incent people to apply the retrofits and pay back the loans through their energy savings. The Pembina Institute has estimated that intensive upgrades of 100,000 homes would see 14,000 to 30,000 person years of employment in British Columbia. That's substantial. Everybody wins. And let me close by talking a bit about transit. You can see I've got the vote yes button on. I'm not going to debate whether TransLink is an effective transit organization. There's no point doing that. Every organization could be more effective and more efficient. We could have more transparent governance, but the truth is there's not a transit company around the world that isn't loathed by somebody who's had to wait in the rain for a bus or wait while there was a breakdown of the rapid transit system. But in addition to spurring the economy by reducing congestion, in addition to helping ensure that we maintain a livable region as 1 million new people come into the Lower Mainland over the next 20 years, transit has an important role to play in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and in helping the economy. There will be 44,000 person years of employment in the 10-year transit plan that's currently being voted on in the Lower Mainland. Whether or not we should be voting on it, a valid question. I personally believe these are exactly the kinds of decisions that politicians are elected to make, and to decide after reviewing all of the evidence with experts what the best and most equitable mix of funding options will be, as well as what kind of transportation options are needed. But having said that, we're having a vote, the result of which would be a better economy, less time spent idling in traffic, lower greenhouse gas emissions, more time for people with their families, 44,000 person years of employment, $4.5 billion toward GDP, And if it doesn't pass, we don't get any of that. At least we don't get any of that without spending another minimum 2 or 3 years in a painful argument about what we should be doing about transit in Metro Vancouver. So I hope that for all of you here, you'll be voting yes, and for the students here, you'll be urging your fellow students to remember, oh, right, I should vote. Because I don't know anybody who doesn't think the plan's a good idea who uses transit, and I know that students do use transit. So let me simply close by saying there's another cartoon I'd put up if I had it, and it's a climate change conference, and somebody stands up from the back of the room facing a chalkboard or a screen like this that shows all the potential devastating aspects of climate change, and the person's question is, but what if this is just a giant hoax and we create a better world for nothing? I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you very much for that, George Heyman. That was very thought-provoking. It's definitely important to bring the discussion back home to BC, and I felt like you did a great job of that. So thank you. Next, we're going to have Sally Aitken. She is professor at the Department of Forestry and is director of the Center for Forest Conservation Genetics at UBC. She studies the population, conservation, and ecological genetics and genomics of forest trees. She completed her PhD at the University of California, Berkeley, and was a faculty member at the Oregon State University. She teaches forest biology, alpine ecology, and conservation genetics, and is involved in forest genetic conservation initiatives in North America and Europe. It is an absolute pleasure having her here on our panel today. Her hands-on knowledge with forestry and conservation will surely bring an interesting and well-needed perspective to the discussion here today.
Okay, so thanks very much for the invitation to be here today. And I'm going to talk about, in fact, I have to say that I've been at a climate change conference downtown for the last couple of days. And I took the bus up from UBC Robson Square to give this talk. And on the way up, I actually decided to take quite a different tact. So I'm going to talk a little bit about impacts, which is what Miguel and Stephen asked me to talk about, but mostly I'm going to talk about solutions. So I'm in a strangely optimistic frame of mind right now, and what I'm mainly going to tell you about is an initiative that I've been involved with for the last couple of years that is exploding with optimism, I would say. And so from impacts to solutions. So, first of all, there's no future in business as usual. In terms of greenhouse gas emissions, if we keep going on the path we're on, then the world isn't going to be a place that any of us or want our children or grandchildren to be. Now, Canada may get off, parts of Canada will get off a little lighter than many parts of the world, but that doesn't make it right to proceed as usual. So here we have some projections just for Canada. The top one projecting the stabilizing greenhouse gases at about 450 parts per million. And the map shows the effect in terms of climate, in terms of the extent of warming across Canada. And the bottom map shows if we proceed with business as usual, with temperatures in the Arctic increasing over 10 degrees Celsius, and really with the ecological situation as we know it changed dramatically. And with that big change in climate, we expect huge impacts both in our terrestrial ecosystems and in our oceans. And for example, just in British Columbia alone, here we have a map on the left showing the current distribution of our 16 major ecosystem types in the province. Now, 13 of these are forested, and they all have different tree species dominating in mature forests. And the map on the right shows a middle-of-the-road scenario for climate change where the climates associated with those ecosystems will be. Notice how different the map on the left and the right are. So all those, all the biodiversity we have with habitats moving considerably and in unpredictable directions also, and with our forests that we rely on so much that play an important role in the carbon cycle changing. Now, how many of you knew, hopefully you all know about BC's carbon tax, right? We have a carbon tax, revenue neutral. BC was a leader in terms of putting a price on carbon. And the talk this morning by Thomas Peterson, who's the director of the Pacific Institute of Climate Studies over in Victoria, he attributed the carbon tax to one thing, and that was the mountain pine beetle. So the mountain pine beetle has killed pines over something like 16 million hectares in British Columbia. Absolutely enormous areas, something like $750 billion worth of wood, if you put that into economic terms. And this resulted, in part, not in full, because of climate warming and winters that no longer killed the mountain pine beetle. So we're seeing effects of climate change already on our forests, which is what I study, but on many other ecosystems as well. So just a couple of little things about forests. Canada has a lot of the world's forests. We've got about 9% of the forest globally, 24% of boreal forests. About 2/3 of our species in Canada live in forests, as do about 70% of our Aboriginal communities. And lots of people make a living in the forests. And we look at the roof here, we look at the walls. I really like wood a lot more than the plastic in the chairs, I have to say. But wood is a lower carbon building material than the alternatives, than the steel or the concrete. And so we rely on our forests to provide that wood. We also rely on our forests to provide habitat for a lot of biodiversity and for jobs and as an economic driver. And that means that forests are something that gets directly affected by climate change, but they also directly affect climate change. So the amount of carbon that goes into our forests each year, that's sequestered into our forests each year, about equals the total amount of emissions of CO2 in British Columbia. So we've got this trade-off. So forests are a good place to talk about climate impacts and climate solutions, because they're involved in both. But that's not, I could go on and talk about how we can manage forests to be healthier and more resilient as climates change, and I can talk about the importance of getting greenhouse gases under control so that we mitigate climate change. But instead, I want to talk about what I've been spending a lot of time working on. Oh, I have one more forest slide. So we've actually seen our forests, though, recently go from being temporarily go from being carbon sinks rather to carbon sources, just because of the mountain pine beetle. And there's a lot of uncertainty as to what our future forests will look like. And we've also done some over-harvesting, partly because of the mountain pine beetle. And the amount of harvesting that's happened in the name of salvage logging, where the beetle's already been, or in anticipation of the beetle coming in, has been unsustainable. Now, trees can't keep up with climate change, and neither can a lot of other organisms. This is a chart from the IPCC that shows the migration capacity of species. And you can notice trees on the far left at the low level. And this scales it relative to increases in carbon dioxide levels and how far they would have to move. But really, a lot of things aren't going to be able to keep up. But now I'm going to talk about solutions, not problems. That's what happens when you change your slide order on the bus. So anyways, what I want to talk about is this report on the right, Acting on Climate Change, Solutions for Canadian Scholars. And so in the middle of this picture on the left is Catherine Potvin. Catherine is a professor, a very distinguished professor at McGill University. She's a tropical forest ecologist. She was a negotiator at the Copenhagen climate meetings for Panama. She spends half her time in Panama. That's where she does research, and she's married to a Panamanian. And she was so depressed, as were many negotiators at Copenhagen, at the lack of any sort of solid activity, especially on the part of Canada, but not only on the part of Canada, that she really was in deep despair about anything happening. And then she decided to do something about it. So she started bringing people together to work on this initiative. And she asked me close to 3 years ago if I would be on the scientific committee. And at the time I said yes, you know, partly for selfish reasons. My daughter's at McGill. It's nice to see her more often. But partly because I thought we need to do something. And I can do all the research in the world, but if we're not changing the policies, if we're not changing the practices, then what's the point? So I got involved thinking, well, what impact are we going to have? We've got to try. And Catherine put together a scientific committee of about 6 people, and she got together 60 academics across the country, and we prepared a report. And here's the report. It's available to all of you. You can also endorse it online. And we launched it last month in Montreal at the Americana conference, which is a big green tech conference with about 10,000 participants. And we have received an incredible response. Almost no negativity. People are really enthused about manageable, within reach solutions. So, the biggest ones. 100% renewable electricity across Canada by 2035. 80% reduction in total emissions by 2050. And carbon pricing. National carbon pricing. Renewable energy. So Catherine and the team put together this map of renewable energy potential. That glow across the prairies is solar. The green shows hot spots for wind with good wind energy potential. And the dots show existing and potential hydroelectric projects. We have a vast renewable energy potential. One of our problems is that our electrical grids are oriented north-south, and when a province that has a lot of renewable energy, like BC, exports it, it doesn't go to Alberta, which is burning coal for electricity. It goes to the US. So we don't have a way to transmit, to transport electricity east-west, and that's certainly one of our recommendations. So we've come up with 10 key policy orientations, and I don't expect you to be able to read these, but I'm going to just tell you what a few of them are. First one, put a price on carbon. Secondly, we need those aggressive goals around renewable energy that I just mentioned. Third, and George Heyman mentioned this one, we need to integrate oil and gas production sectors into climate policy. No more subsidies for fossil fuels. And we need to support renewable, low-carbon energy. We need to really develop a multi-level energy policy that has electrification at its core. So we're moving to electric transport systems where the electricity is low-carbon. And we need low-carbon transportation strategies. We need to integrate these things at a landscape scale. We need cities, and Vancouver's been a real leader in this. We need cities with green plans, green technologies, green transportation. We need to vote yes on the transit referendum. The building sector has a lot of things they can do. And as we go along with this, we still need to consider other aspects of sustainability. So we can't put in dams everywhere without considering the impacts to biodiversity. We've got to safeguard our clean water. We've got to better manage our fisheries. And we've got to look at how agriculture, forestry, etc. Operate to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. So in response to this launch, we have had to date well over 100 media stories. We got the front page of the Vancouver Sun the day of the launch, even though we had no representatives there from the BC government. We had representatives from most provincial governments and most major cities present at the launch. We had a UBC event, and we got an op-ed in the Vancouver Sun for that. We've been in all the major and many minor news outlets. Catherine Potvin, if you want to hear her passion, listen to the episode of CBC's The Current that she was on about 2 weeks ago. There's a segment on electric cars and green energy and whether you should be driving an electric car in your community. Depends on where your electricity is coming from. I wanted to end with this quote. Gavin Schmidt is the leading NASA scientist, and he said this at his public lecture down at Robson Square on Thursday night. He said, "Scientists make predictions, citizens make choices." Now, I tweeted this, and I have never had so many retweets of anything, and I think I've arrived because I actually have climate denier trolls after me, like the Friends of Science based in Calgary, which is an oil industry funded bunch of climate haters, climate change science haters. So yeah, it's kind of satisfying in a strange way to get these nasty comments. But I also wanted, oh, that didn't come in all the way. I also wanted to tell you that today in Quebec City, there are 25,000 people there because of the First Minister's meeting. The First Minister's meeting is all the premiers, and the focus is on climate change. Canada has already missed a deadline for the next climate change negotiations, where intended targets were supposed to be submitted last week, and they were not. And so the First Minister's meeting is very important, and it's amazing. 25,000 people showed up to tell the First Ministers and the Prime Minister to get our collective act together. Also at this meeting, the Quebec Minister of Environment is giving our report personally to every Premier and every Environment Minister that shows up, and Quebec is buying all of our recommendations. So that is real leadership. Unfortunately, our own Premier has just announced that she will not be attending this meeting. I think this is the cartoon you were talking about.
That's it.
What if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? There are so many ways we can change what we're doing. We've heard about some of them today, but I really feel like we're on the edge of a sea change. And so the thing is to get out, talk about it. Please, if you think, take a look at our report and endorse it online if you think it's a good idea. But more important than that, take it and ask the candidates in elections in your ridings what they think of it, and hold them to the flame on it and see what happens. We did that at UBC. We had 3 people running in the federal election, came out, we had a great discussion about 10 days ago. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that speech, Sally. It's definitely good to have the insights into our local ecology, and also to have your positive attitude, because as much as we need to be concerned about our green economy and what we have here, it's also important to look forward and look at the ideas that we can use. So I'm going to invite Miguel back up here to moderate the panel discussion, and also all the speakers, if you would come up. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so now we're just going to have a small panel discussion and also Q&A. So each and every one of you will have the opportunity to ask your questions to the panelists. So if we could have Daryl, Sally, and George join us at the front. Great. Well, thanks to all of you, Daryl, George, and Sally, for joining us here. And I think that we can all agree that when it comes to climate change, sustainability, green technologies, we need all these perspectives when it comes to addressing the challenges of our times. So hence why we're most delighted to have you join us here. Now, before we go into the Q&A, I'd just like to start off with 1 or 2 questions. So, and I think each and every one of you could bring in different perspective. Daryl, you could bring in a technology perspective. George, you could bring in the policy, and Sally, you could bring in the environmental. So, question is, what can we do to accelerate green technologies and innovative solutions that drastically reduce the carbon footprint? What would be your viewpoint on that? And so, Daryl, how about we start off with you?
Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Good.
What can we do to accelerate? We struggle with that question every day, and I am really thrilled to be alive in this time where we can communicate all over the world with the automated communication. So there's so much more power to communicate and the leverage of the internet and social networking, but how do we get through the noise? That's kind of a challenge. So we really need a lot of fresh ideas on how to do that, but it's not so much anymore what I can do, it's how can I inspire people to act themselves to get the word out. So now that everybody in the room knows a little bit more about ET3, you can choose to dig in and find out more about it and tell all your friends, or you can choose just to wait for it to happen at a very slow rate, or you can take personal responsibility and do something about it yourselves. So I think that's really, it's a personal responsibility thing to use the best tools that we have to accelerate the rate of adoption of new technologies. And study and vote for the right people that are proposing to do the best thing for the environment and for our standard of living.
Thank you for that, Daryl. Would like to go with that.
I'll try to keep it brief. First one, I agree with Sally totally, is put a price on carbon, which British Columbia has done, and keep escalating the price in carbon, which we haven't done. Ensure that we give tax credits for creating carbon reduction kinds of industrial activity, support and invest in promising technologies and companies that will build the economy of the future and will build an economy that actually helps tackle climate change. And stop telling people we have to choose between the environment and jobs. It's not true. And the sooner politicians stop saying that, the better off we'll all be.
So I think there's a number of things. I don't think this is picking. I'll just hold it. I think there's a number of things we can do, but number one is I think that we need to re-engage young people who feel that it's hopeless and or who feel like politicians will never represent them. And I think that there are a lot of millennials that have very strong environmental ethics and in a lot of ways setting the example for the rest of us, consuming less, riding public transit more, aspiring to share more and own less, and things like that. So those are great tendencies. But we need to vote for people who are going to make those decisions. We need to normalize climate action as a society, where I think that at the federal level we have people who are scared of beating the drum too much about it because of what has happened to certain politicians in the past. But we've got to have change at that level. We also need the carbon pricing because it levels the playing field. Yes, BC's price needs to go up. We've got to have the other provinces putting similar prices on carbon so that we can maintain competitiveness across industries and things like that. But I think there are many things that we can do.
Wonderful. Just one more question that it's also a question that came up as each and every one of you were given the presentations. So besides green technologies, and this is just really briefly.
Too many people who aren't voting, and probably most of those people are in the demographic of 18 to early 30s. And I can speculate on a lot of reasons for that, but I think there's a sense among many people that their vote doesn't make a difference, and that politicians, once elected, don't listen to them, or they just think the system's broken because it swings wildly from one pole to another and never really adequately represents the feelings of the 80% of people who are somewhere in this area in the middle and are used to in their daily lives having rational conversations and working out compromises with people, whether it's neighbors, family members, or or loved ones. So I think one of the ways to tackle that is to change our electoral system so that votes count, which I think in turns will encourage people to vote. Some form of proportional representation, I believe, could do that. And I think that having parliaments or legislatures in which people don't get absolute majorities with something like 40% of the vote of those people who actually come out to vote will make a huge difference in the kind of discussions that happen in the legislature and the kind of collaborative dialogue that could take place in the legislature built around a premise that we actually aren't here. We're here to have ideas. We're here to campaign as politicians on what we believe and try to convince people that we have good ideas. And I would say that fighting climate change and protecting the environment while building a sound, diverse economy is what I believe in, and I think is worth convincing people we should do. But we also have to reach some sort of accommodation with people who come at things from different perspectives and not simply once every 4 years go wildly from one spot to the other on the spectrum. And I think until we get to that kind of better representation of the views and interests of everyone in society, we're not likely to be able to realistically come up with policies that will protect the environment long term and build a more sustainable society and economy while we're doing it.
So I learned something this morning, which I should have known because I'm at UBC after all, but I heard someone else refer to this figure. So the per capita carbon emissions, per student carbon emissions at UBC have dropped 27%. That's pretty good. So I think here at UBC and here in Vancouver, we have all these success stories around the environment and around green decarbonization of the environment that we need to extend those success stories and look for those solutions in other communities and really provide those examples. And the idea that we've got here on campus is really the campus, we're all subjects in this living laboratory around sustainability. It's been really successful. If you've ever been on a tour of the Sears here, all the features that they have for sustainability. And so I think that it's a tough thing. So we need this federal legislation, but we also have the power to do things on the local level to set these examples that are really encouraging to show how things can be done. I don't know if that relates to your question very well. But.
Yeah, I think as far as I would like to extend on the thought of the personal responsibility issue and what can I do to really research and to discern the difference between what is really green technology and what is really greenwashing. And there's a tremendous amount of greenwashing that takes place from corporate industries all over the world that are really increasing the level of noise. And to dig through that takes a lot of really focused research and effort to do that. It is very commonly believed that, and this is supported by literally hundreds of millions of dollars that are poured into it, the belief that trains are green and trains are sustainable and trains are, this wonderful solution. But if we look at the real core issues, it's a classic case of Hans Christian Andersen, The Emperor Has No Clothes. Has everybody read that book that for kids and adults too? If trains were as wonderful, passenger trains I'm talking about, were as wonderful as what the rail industry purports, why is it that trains have gone from a 90% market share in the year 1910 to 1916 for travel between cities, major cities, to today's 1% use? The main reason is they're really not sustainable. Professor Kemp at Lancaster University has published a study showing that today's aircraft burn less resources, less carbon production, and less energy use on a passenger mile or passenger kilometer basis than the best aircraft. Aircraft use less than the best high-speed rail. And the best cars, like the Toyota Prius or the very efficient diesel cars and hybrid cars and electric cars, on a passenger mile basis, are using less carbon and having less environmental impact than commuter rail and commuter trains. So when we look at something on one side as being the greenwashed version, we really need to strip that down to the truth of the matter. And the truth of the matter is that every one of those seats on a rail system in the United States and around the world costs anywhere from $50,000 to $70,000 per seat for that vehicle cost, and that ends up in the rail industry pocket. And they want governments all around the world to keep on making those expenditures at that level. You know, maintaining it, if it's only at 1% or 2% of the entire amount of transportation, it's invisible, and people don't really dig into it and see how much money is being wasted and the resources that are being wasted. A train weighs over a ton of weight per seat of capacity. We could buy, for what we're spending on rail in the United States, $50,000 per seat, we could buy 2 Toyota Priuses for every seat on a train and give them away and save money, because you don't have the infrastructure cost that is far greater than the cost of roads. Governments around the world pay 100% of the infrastructure cost, 100% of the vehicle cost, and anywhere from 1/3 of the operating expense to 2/3 of the operating expense for those vehicles. It's not a sustainable model. The only reason they exist in the big cities is because everybody in the whole country pays for it, and only a small percentage can actually use it. That is not a sustainable model. So we have to really take personal responsibility for digging into the facts and understanding what's really happening. You know, the fact that Canada is very sustainable because most of the energy here comes from hydroelectric, whereas if we transition to electric in the United States for cars, for instance, we would actually be producing more pollution by electrifying because of the much dirtier realities of coal. So we had to take personal responsibility for really digging in and finding out what those facts are. So I would respectfully have to ask you to vote no on rail, because what rail is doing, investments of government subsidizing rail, has a chilling effect on innovation. What investor is going to want to invest in a new innovative technology like ET3 or other PRT technologies? There are hundreds of them, literally, if you dig into it and research it, that are much cleaner and greener than cars, and way cleaner and greener than trains and buses. So it's really a personal thing that we have to dig into and find that information out for ourselves, because that chilling effect on innovation is that no small company can compete with government that taxes the small company out of existence and uses that tax dollars to subsidize a industry that should have failed 100 years ago or 50 years ago.
Now, I know that both George and Sally have very strong points regarding the transport referendum, for instance. Do any of you have any rebuttals, any points you'd like to mention regarding those comments?
So, if we take the case of Europe,
Yeah.
not North America, I mean, we have huge transport distances here, which makes trains challenging to make work. But if you look at Europe or you look at Japan, where the majority of people are taking trains on a regular basis, do your comments still apply? Or are you talking about the American context?
More so in America, of course, and you're correct that a higher percentage of people in Europe travel by train. That they spend a much greater percentage of the GDP on rail transit in particular. But if we really look at the numbers, and we can go online to look this up, there's many organizations that have the statistics. In the United States, about 7% of passenger miles is air miles. About 3% is bus and trains, transit, and less than 1% is muscle power, and then the remainder, almost 90%, is automobiles. If we look at Europe, it's about 75% automobiles, and maybe about 20% trains and bus transit. And Japan, it's about 60% automobiles and 30% trains. And the trains continue to lose market share even in those areas outside of North America. They continue to lose market share, even though in Japan in particular, the cost of fuel has about a 200%, 300% tax on it for car use, and so people are paying $8 a gallon for gasoline for their cars in Japan, and that goes to offset those horrific costs of rail. And everybody pays in Japan a toll for the roads. Almost all roads in Japan are toll roads. In addition, there is a very large tax when they buy the vehicle, and then when they resell the vehicle, if you buy a used vehicle, the tax in many cases is over 100% of the cost. It doubles the cost of a used vehicle for the tax that's placed on private cars. And still, the car continues to gain market share because it represents so much better value for most people than those trains do. So the population density also in Japan is 6 times greater than it is in California, and California is one of the most densely populated areas in the United States. So if we really look at the facts, what we find is that no train system in the entire world is covering its cost of the infrastructure and the cost of the vehicle. There's only one place in the world where the operating expense is being recovered, and that is Japan. They are producing a slight excess in extra amount beyond the cost of the operation alone. And that's because they herd people in like cordwood. They call them train packers that actually push the people in, standing room only. And the reason is we can't effectively load a train. Trains are designed for hauling mining materials and coal from the mine. So 110 tons per car. If we put 110 tons of people in one car, the density of a person is about half the density of coal and about maybe a third of the density of mining materials. You'd have to have people stacked in like cordwood, 3 cars high on each car to effectively load the train. So it's lunacy to make the emperor wears no clothes argument that trains are somehow more sustainable. The rail industry is only using boatloads of money to convince us that it's the green solution. But if you really dig into it, it's a classic case of greenwashing all over the world, Japan and Europe also.
George, do you have any comments? I know you have to leave soon, so.
No, I'm not going to comment on this. I just don't have enough personal knowledge of the studies.
Yeah, but I think Daryl pointed out something, thanks to Sally's question as well, is It also depends on, for instance, in the American context, if you're going to electrify railways, the energy consumption of the United States mostly comes from fossil fuels, coal, for instance, for the most part. So it really also depends on the locational circumstances. In BC, perhaps it makes makes a bit more sense to continue our path, at least for the time being, because most, as you mentioned, most of our energy comes from renewable energy sources.
And electric cars really make a lot more sense because the population is funding that themselves out of their own pocket for their own benefit, and instead of the government taking money from one person and transferring it to a wealthy company that is spending millions of dollars to lobby those politicians and to basically lie to them.
Yeah, and I believe that also, as you mentioned, I think it also depends on the locational circumstances. So I know that we're having a pretty healthy debate here. Lots of viewpoints, but now we're going to jump into the Q&A. So who would like to take on this question?
Yes, you all mentioned that. Good afternoon. You've all mentioned that politics play a role in your cause for global warming, and I know that lobbying is a key aspect in convincing politicians to move their vote in one direction. So my question is this: how can lobbying reformations have an effect on your cause? Help or damage it? Thank you very much.
Well, that's a really good question, and I think that I'll go back to one of the comments that George made, which is that we need political reform, because I think that we have a situation where we get, first of all, we don't get represented, we don't get votes well represented in our governments. But secondly, I think that there could be a lot more productive collaboration among parties if we had that sort of a system. And I think that then, like with our initiative, Sustain, we are reaching out to all parties equally. We're nonpartisan. We're talking to everybody. We're trying to convince them all that we, that we have some very straightforward solutions for adopting. And one of the things that I would say that I struggle with as a scientist is separating the role of expert from the role of advocate, from the role of activist. And it's one that I'm not sure that I have found the right solution on, but we sit in a very privileged position in academia where I have the freedom to say whatever I think is right, and the university still employs me. It's nice to see you here today, but having that security to advocate for the right thing is important, but I think that everybody should be asking the same questions of all political candidates. So I would say there's a very effective organization in Vancouver called Voters Take Action on Climate Change. And every election they have yard signs that you can put out, and they don't say I'm voting for the Liberals or the NDP or the Greens or whatever. They say I'm voting on climate change. And I think that's one powerful way to lobby. And they have a list of questions they go around and ask every candidate, and then they rank the candidates. So there's different forms of lobbying, but I think that we have to get politicians to be not afraid of taking on this issue also. And at the federal level, that's been a problem.
When the legislature's in session in Victoria, we're regularly lobbied 3 or 4 times a week by organizations, whether they're organizations for cancer or heart disease or kids' well-being or the mining industry or environmental groups. And everybody has a different approach. You can tell which groups have greater resources and money, and I'm not sure how effective it is. I think part of the answer is for the whole public and political process to establish opportunities for, whether it's called lobbying or informing or dialogue, to have just a more productive discussion of issues in which what's being said is more transparent, whether it's public hearings that are recorded as part of the legislative record and broadcast on television, so that the public can actually assess what's being said to policymakers, and people, particularly scientists, can weigh in as to its accuracy. I think one of the horrible things that has happened federally is the downgrading of science as an informant of public policy making and a muzzling of scientists. That's just wrong. And it's not in the public interest whatsoever. So I think having a fora in which scientists are encouraged to bring forward and evaluate and discuss and debate ideas is useful, and then setting up different forms of public dialogue and public hearings in which the public, as well as scientists and advocates for whatever position on a particular issue, can come forward and engage with politicians on that issue in a public and transparent way, would be ultimately a far healthier form of democracy than people inviting me and my colleagues into a closed and private dinner to give us their point of view. We go, they have a right to access us and talk to us, but it's not necessarily healthy. We're not able to gauge the accuracy of what they say, and certainly the public isn't, because they're not there.
I think it's a really good question, and unfortunately, the economy of the United States and Canada is somewhere 70 to 80% of the economy is the private sector and not government. So we can have much more of an effect by voting with our dollars of how we spend our dollars and what we do personally ourselves, that personal responsibility element, that finding out what the core issues are and support the companies that you want to have use those dollars to lobby government, and do not support the companies that you do not. And it's really tough to do. It takes time to really sort through all of the noise and finding out what the real facts are. And there are a lot of tools online to do that, fortunately.
Great. I think we have time for one more question.
Yes, I'll have the technical question to Daryl, but first I'd like to have just a couple of comments. So there is in the MPEL building here one of those little train tracks that levitate ITC superconductors. So if anybody is interested, just contact Professor Bond in the physics department. Okay, so my one comment that no one seems to have taken up here is land use choices, and also we do talk about buildings. I don't think the towers with the glass completely uninsulated panels are very useful. Now for the technical questions. So I assume the tracks use rare magnets, and the ITC superconductors are in the little cars.
Yes.
What kind of vacuum do you need to have very little friction? And how about the availability of the rare earths and also the ITC superconductors for that kind of deployment?
That's a very good question. Indeed, that is the case, that the rare earth magnets, neodymium being the component that is the rare earth component. It's most of it is iron still, and the amount of known reserves is enough for about 2 million miles of double tube ET3 system. The known reserves of the neodymium, and it is likely that it would have an effect on the price and the mining. Japan has announced that they have found nodules off the coast, in between Japan and Hawaii, actually, that are 10 times to 20 times the entire known reserves of rare earth elements. And when we actually look at the amount of rare earths, they're really not that rare compared to precious metals like gold and so forth. But they are fairly uniformly distributed. They're not concentrated. There's only a few places that they're really concentrated. One of them, the cheapest place right now, is in the Gobi Desert, where they can just pretty much load up the deposits with the front end loader. It's very low impact mining. They're not going into deep mining situations for those. So those deposits would probably be used up before the offshore deposits would be exploited. From the standpoint of the high temperature superconductor elements, there's really been a lot of amazing advances in those materials. When we were in China, the piece of yttrium barium copper oxide element was a single crystal about this big around and about this big, and cost a few $100s a piece to make. It had to be baked in an oven about 900 hours to get that crystal to form. Now they are getting maybe 10,000 times more levitation force per unit of rare earth material by using vapor deposited thin layers on films built up for superconducting tapes. 1 micron thick by 12 millimeters wide will carry 450 amps of current. And Dr. Oleg Chevchenko is the world's foremost expert on superconductivity. He was the guy in the video talking about the calculations that they've done for the offshore wind farms that they're talking about in Denmark. And he compared the carbon savings for investing the same amount of money into ET3 and the amount of carbon that would be displaced from other modes of transportation would be 3 times to 5 times more than the amount of carbon for the same amount of money invested in the wind parks. He currently has the world record in low-cost superconductor cable for moving the power from those wind parks to the onshore locations. And he's a professor at TU Delft. He currently holds the world record. The cable can be built and cooled with liquid nitrogen cheaper than copper wire on a per amp basis. It's really phenomenal. It's not as cheap yet as aluminum, but there's been a lot of really big leaps made in high energy superconductivity, and so the amount of materials there we're dealing with is just a very, very thin 1 micron thick, a thousandth of a millimeter thick coating on a tenth of a millimeter thick piece of Hastelloy metal that carries that very high amount of current. So there is concern with the neodymium as a rare earth element. There are some materials on the horizon. It's a new form of magnetic material that promises about a 20 or 30% gain over the neodymium ferrite material as far as magnetic strength, and it is some type of a resonant structure that allows the iron atoms to get closer than theoretically possible. So they don't know exactly how it works, but it is greater density than a hexagonal close pack crystalline configuration. So there is much to learn about that, but that promises to be an order of magnitude less cost than the rare earth magnet material.
Great. So I know that you, Alan, you had a question, but we do have to wrap this up. George actually has to get going. I apologize, I really want to get over time. But do any of you, the three of you, have any closing remarks? Anything you'd like to mention to close off the panel discussion? Let's start with Sally.
I'd like to respond to your land use comment. It's very important, and I think it comes into play in a number of ways. First of all, around communities that don't sprawl. We need high density cities, we need high density towns, and I would argue the love of the automobile is partially because we tend to be very sprawled. I know there's other factors. Secondly, we have to worry about deforestation and land use conversion. And in fact, in Canada, most of our deforestation it arises from conversion to agriculture. It arises from the oil and gas industry considerably. If you've ever flown over parts of Alberta where the seismic lines are and things like that. Deforestation itself contributes a lot to global carbon release. So we have to think about all of these things. It's interesting that forestry per se is not, because we replant most of our forests, there's relatively little deforestation that happens through logging because they're replanted. They certainly go through being old forest and then no forest and then forest again, but they'll start sequestering carbon. But I think we always have to keep our eye on that land use planning topic. And there's only one pie, and all the uses want bigger pieces than are available.
Daryl, would you like to give any closing remarks, closing statements?
Yeah, I think that I would also like to comment on the land use. I really do think it's very, very important, and it's transportation being the master key to survival. People in cities really think that they are they don't need cars. They can get everything within a couple blocks radius in many cases to survive just fine. But it has been proven in many medieval sieges, when you surrounded city and cut off the flow in and out, the transportation, that the price of bread goes up to equal weight with the price of gold when Jerusalem is surrounded by Salah ad-Din, for instance. Land use is really critical, and we're becoming much more urbanized. And unfortunately, the urban areas have taken are situated where the best agriculture areas were. That's where it's easiest to survive and easiest to get the food. So that sprawl that you're talking about has spread out over our most productive ground, unfortunately. So by having a extremely efficient transportation mode that can accomplish 50 times more transportation per kilowatt hour than the most efficient electric car or electric train, people can live in mountainous areas that aren't arable and very difficult to log and beautiful to experience and much closer to nature, and be more dispersed, but still be able to get to key locations for work and things like that. So I think land use really does have a lot of facets to it, and there are a lot of ways to look at it also that are outside the box of ordinary thinking. Cities are really not very sustainable, and that's proven by the tax base and having to go out way beyond, the footprint of the city goes way beyond the city. If you just look at the cost of building a tower, the cost per square meter is maybe 2 or 3 times the expense of a single-story dwelling built with low energy methods. And the solution to pollution is dilution. So concentrating everything in very dense population centers might have things that aren't totally looked at as far as the footprint that goes way, way beyond the bounds of the city.
I think I'd simply close by saying, and I hope I didn't leave the impression when I was speaking about technology, that that if we invest more in technology, we'll be able to find a way to continue to live a wasteful lifestyle without emitting as much carbon pollution, because technology will not allow us to continue to overuse a finite amount of resources. It will allow us to use them better and more responsibly to support people more equitably. I would say that, you know, sometime over the next relatively small number of years, some people may say it's only a couple, it could be 5, it could be 10. We have to collectively make better decisions. We have to change the nature of the discussion we're having as societies around the world, or this generation, the next generation, the one over that, or after that, are going to be facing very unpleasant futures. And we do have it within our collective intelligence, the ability to do things differently and still have enjoyable, productive lives, just as people learn to move from large, sprawling homes into living in much smaller footprints. There's a limit to how small anyone would want to go, and realize, you know what, this actually works quite nicely. In fact, in some ways it works better. We can do that in any number of ways, and we need to do that. What we need to resist is one of the unfortunate, I think, results of the range of technologies available to people, at least in the developed world, is people's attention in some ways is focused inward or into distractions, and we've stopped seeing the environment in which we live, and we need to turn that around, or as I said, it will not be very pleasant. But if people collectively demand that decision makers make different kinds of decisions that are being made, then I think there's a much brighter future ahead, not just environmentally, but socially, and both in terms of social engagement and social equity, and I look forward to being part of it.
Well, thank you so much. I think that was a really good way to end the discussion here. George, Daryl, and Sally. One takeaway item that I would take from this is the importance of taking responsibility, personal choices, but also we are the future as well for us young people, and we are the change makers as well, whether it's policymakers, whether it's the private sector, whether it's consumers. But I like what you mentioned as well, George. It's about technology. I am a big fan of technology. I'm a bit of a geek, for those of you that know me, I am. But I also agree that technology will not solve everything. We have to question our consumption patterns. Natural resources is about the responsible management of resources. I mean, I've heard figures that 80% of the world's resources are used by 20% of humanity. I don't think that's okay. So it's about the responsible management of resources for the collective well-being of society, while taking into account the social, ecological, and political implications of our actions on our environment. So I think that's something that we should take away from this. So once again, thank you so much for joining us here. And right now what I'd like to do is if we could have a round of applause for our panelists. So one way that we'd like to close this off is, I know you have to get going, George, so you have to go, that's okay. But we're now just going to take about 5 minutes. So Steven and I will just briefly recap on our events that we've had over the past few weeks. We've had a number of workshops. Most of them have been interactive in nature, so we've had panel discussions, but also we've also created a space where panelists have been able to interact with the audience. This was not the case for this particular discussion, but I still think we had a very fruitful debate. So we'll take about 5 minutes to talk about that, and then we'll wrap it up. Steven, would you like to start?
Alright, so to keep our project strongly based in Vancouver, we started our workshops with social sustainability. We focus mostly on the downtown east side and tackle issues challenging social sustainability, such as lack of access to education, housing, and job finding. On the other side, we talked a lot about social enterprise and policy. Now, these can be instrumental in solving issues that face the marginalized sectors of society. In the end, we decided that social sustainability is important to all of us, but also a complex issue, needing a lot more time. Next, we move on to food security. During this workshop, we realized how closely interconnected the areas of sustainability are. Our lineup panelists were experts in farming, local food security, and international food security. There was an emphasis on the wastefulness of our current systems and the development of local food systems. For the international portion, factors such as location, traditional diet, and cultural needs came to mind. We tied this in with a critique on the industrialization of international food system due to economic demands. In our international aid workshop, we also found some intimate connections with our other workshop topics, especially with social sustainability and food security. The discussion began with some insights into just how our current ways of providing international aid have proven ineffective. We worked on broad areas such as institutions, economics, and the structure of society. For the large part, it came down to letting locals lead the charge for change, with some small amount of guidance and resources from outside. What specifics came up in our breakout groups often focused on systemic issues, cultural sensitivity, and education. As well, in our workshop on ecological economics, participants learn how to approach economics from a different perspective, an approach that offers a way of understanding and solving problems by looking at the relationships between the interactions between economies and ecosystems that support them. It recognizes that there are limits to economic activity given planetary boundaries and resource constraints, and that achieving sustainability requires respect of these biophysical limits, just distribution of the proceeds of our economies, and efficient allocation of our resources. We also tackled issues relating to corporate social responsibility and discussed its role in leading us towards a more sustainable future. Is the triple bottom line approach enough? How can companies incorporate social, economic, and environmental commitments into their local business practices, both internally and externally? We must also recognize the global linkages and interconnected nature of our world, and especially the growing influence of large multinational corporations and the global supply chains within which they operate. In this way, we must also consider what corporate social responsibility looks like at a global scale and the opportunities and challenges for sustainability that result from this.
And of course, today's event has been a special one. We talked about green technologies, we talked about the importance of shifting the discussion around climate change, sustainability, the importance of policy as well, but also recognizing the environmental impacts of our actions. Human civilization has grown exponentially, and we can definitely see the potential through Daryl's presentation today in terms of bringing the future to the present. But at the same time, we must recognize that our actions have had detrimental effects to the environment, not just increasing CO2 levels, but also deforestation, as Sally was talking about, the acidification of the oceans. Not many people are aware, for instance, the methane levels. There is huge quantities of methane in the permafrost and in the bottom of the oceans. Just a small change in the temperature, global temperature, can release all those methane quantities into the atmosphere. Methane is 24 times more potent than CO2. Imagine the kind of world that would be. It would not be a pleasant world, and many are already facing the consequences of those actions. So it is clear that a paradigm shift must occur if we are to fully exploit the ingenuity of human potential to address the unprecedented challenges of our times. This will, however, require a collaborative approach where we can all foster a constructive dialogue between different sectors of society and people from all walks of life. Here at Davidson Perspective, we have sought to accomplish just that. And the workshops that we've organized over the past few weeks are just the start of a paradigm shift the paradigm shift that we're just talking about. And although we have not been able to address and answer all the big questions posed during the workshops, many attendees and panelists have expressed their joy and optimism that these conversations are happening and that they're being held in the first place, and that it is important for us to continue having these conversations. We have tried to make the workshops as engaging as possible, balancing our time between presentations from speakers, Q&A sessions with panelists, and group discussions where attendees have had the opportunity to engage with other fellow attendees and panelists, as we were just saying. Whether you're a student or someone already in the workforce, we can all learn from each other. I encourage you to not only listen and learn as we have done today, but to also raise awareness in whatever capacity you can, and to start taking action to make sure that the way in which we design our societies in the 21st century will be more sustainable and more mindful of the social, economic, and environmental impacts of human activities. It is also clear that not everyone has benefited from economic development fairly, so it is perhaps about time for us to reconsider the way in which we allocate resources in our society and to make sure that they're managed responsibly and fairly. So we all have a moral imperative to make this a better world. Although today's event is the last of our sustainability workshop and event series, this is only the beginning of a much larger project at hand. Moving forward, however, will not be possible if we don't all come together and see everyone's perspectives as valuable assets to make this a better world. And that is why we encourage you to join us in this endeavor and start making some change. Come and talk to us if you're interested and if you'd like to get involved. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Thank you to the panelists, all of you attendees, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.